There is a kind of city that will put a price upon anything. It does not do so out of malice, for malice at the least takes an interest in the thing it ruins. It does so out of appetite, a vast and even-handed appetite that lays a widow's wedding ring in the same cold scale as a lord's gold snuff-box, and finds them both to be so many grains of metal and nothing further. London in the wet grey close of that year was such a city. The good shops burned amber into the fog, and behind their counters sat men who could tell you to the shilling what your grandmother's silver would fetch, and who told you gently, almost kindly, so that you did not at the first understand that you had been robbed. Everything in that city carried its figure. A house carried one, a name carried one, an hour of a laboring man's strength carried one. Even the love of certain people was reckoned and weighed, though that sum was counted quietly and never set down in ink. There was a warmth in the trade of it, whole rooms made warm by the pleasant heat of money passing from hand to hand. And none of that warmth was ever meant for the one who had come to sell. The seller stood always a little apart from the fire of it, holding the last warm thing she owned, and smiling. The widow at the long counter of Halcombe's sale rooms that grey afternoon was smiling, and the young clerk who had the serving of her wished with his whole heart that she would stop. Her name was Heirloom Culvain. She was 29 years of age, and there had been a season not so many years gone when a room of this kind would have opened before her as such rooms open before the well-born and the certain. That season was over. She knew the very day upon which it had ended, and she did not permit herself to stand in it now. She held herself straight in a gown that had been fine once, and was fine yet, if the eye were kept from the cuffs, and she laid upon the green cloth a small thing folded in clean linen, and she unfolded it with her own fingers, for she would not have the clerk suppose her hands afraid to touch it. It was a locket of soft worn gold, oval, no greater across than a woman's thumbnail, upon a thin chain. It had been her mother's, and her mother's mother's before that, and it was, upon this grey afternoon, the last thing of any worth that Heirloom Culvain had left in all the world to sell. The clerk fetched the appraiser, an older man named Pruitt, with a jeweler's glass, and a jeweler's habit of looking first at the seller and only after at the thing. He looked at Heirloom a moment. He saw the straight back and the mended cuff and the smile, and he understood the whole of her at a glance, for he had seen a great many such women across a great many years, and he was sorry in the small, tired way of a man who is sorry too often to feel it much. Then he took up the locket and turned his glass upon it. He was honest, as such men go. He told her the gold was soft and worn thin at the edge, where a thumb had rubbed it the better part of 100 years. He told her the little painting within, the miniature of a fair young woman, long dead, was of no account to any buyer but the family it belonged to, and that family was the one standing before him with nothing. He named a figure. It was a small figure, smaller than she had let herself hope in the private place where a person keeps such hopes, and larger than she had feared in the other place, and she had learned in 2 hard years to live between those 2 places and show neither upon her face. She smiled and thanked him, and asked whether he might do a little better, and he said kindly that he might not. That was the smile the clerk could not bear. It was not the bright, false smile of a woman pretending to be gay. It was worse. It was a steady, gentle, well-kept thing, the smile of a person who has decided, quite calmly and quite finally, that whatever else is taken from her, the manner of the taking will be her own, and no man in a warm room will be given the small pleasure of watching her break. It was the last article of value she owned, and she wore it the way another woman wears her pearls, and she meant to keep it long after the gold was gone. She had not always had need of it. Heirloom had been born in a good house in a green county, the daughter of a gentleman of no great fortune and great gentleness, and until she was 19, she had believed, as the sheltered believe, that the world was on the whole a fair place that meant her well. She had been cured of that in a single spring. The house had gone, and the green county with it, and her father's good name with that, through a matter she had never once, in all the years after, been able to speak of aloud, for the speaking of it opened a door she could not afterward get shut. 2 years on, she had married Colvane, a quiet, older man, kind and clever and poor, who had wanted nothing of her but her company. He had died the autumn before last, and left her his kindness and his debts, which are a heavier inheritance together than either is apart. She had paid those debts by selling, one thing at a time, everything that could be sold. The locket upon the green cloth was the bottom of that long descent. After the locket, there was nothing. So she took up Pruitt's pen, because a small figure was better than a cold room and an empty grate, and she was bending to sign his paper when she grew aware, in the way one grows aware of a change in the weather, that she was being watched. At the far end of the long room, near the tall window that gave onto the street, a gentleman stood very still. He was tall and dark and dressed with the plain, costly quietness of a man who has never in his life needed to be looked at to be sure of his place. She could not see his face well against the gray light. She could see only that he had gone entirely still in the manner of a man struck in the chest by the sight of something, and that his stillness was fixed not upon her face, which he could hardly make out better than she made out his, but lower upon her hands, upon the small worn oval of gold lying open upon the green cloth between her fingers. He was looking at the locket as though he had seen it before, as though he had seen it a very long time ago in another country of his life, and had never once in all the years between expected to see it again. Eloan did not know him. She was certain she did not, for she had trained her memory hard against the faces of the world she had lost, and his was not among the faces she had kept. And yet, something in the set of that dark still figure against the window brushed against her like a hand laid in the dark upon a wall she thought she knew, and was gone before she could name it. Pruitt turned the paper toward her. She signed, and the tall, dark gentleman turned without a word, and went out into the fog. And a moment later, through the tall glass, she saw a carriage move off from the far side of the street, black and gleaming and crested upon the door, with arms she was too far to read. She told herself it was nothing. A great city was full of gentlemen who stared, and a woman selling her mother's locket had no leisure to wonder at any of them. She was wrong upon every count, though she would not learn how wrong for another day. The offer found her the next morning at the door of the narrow lodging-house where she had a narrow room, and it came, as such things come to such women, at the worst possible hour, when she had risen with no more plan for the day than to make Pruitt's small figure last as long as a small figure could be made to last. A man waited in the mean little hall below, neither young nor old, sober in his dress, exact in his manner, with the smooth, unreadable courtesy of a man whose whole profession is the carrying of other men's business. He asked, with great correctness and no curiosity, that he would let her see whether he had the honor of addressing the widow Colvane. She said that he had. He said his name was Threlfall, that he was a man of business, and that he was charged to lay a proposal before her, if she would do him the goodness of hearing it. She had learned to be afraid of proposals. She had learned that a proposal laid before a woman with nothing was very often a trap with the cheese already in it. She kept her smile, and asked whose business he came upon. He told her, and the name went through the cold hall like a draught. His principal, he said, was the Duke of Windermere. Eloan knew that name. Everyone in England knew that name, though almost no one could say they knew the man who carried it, and that was the sum of his reputation in a single stroke. The Duke of Windermere was a byword and a puzzle and a small cold legend told in warm drawing rooms. He was enormously rich and almost never seen, shut away in the north upon his great estates, come south seldom, staying nowhere, bound to no one, and to nothing that a man could name. There were as many tales of why as there were tongues to tell them. Some said his heart had died young with a woman no one now remembered, and that he had never after let himself feel a thing he might lose. Some said he had done a great wrong in his youth, some cowardice or some cruelty, and could not bear the company of anyone who might come to expect better of him. Some said, and these liked him least, that he was simply the proudest man in the kingdom, too proud to spend his word upon a world he held beneath him. There is nothing a warm room forgives less than a man who will not warm himself at it. But upon one strange thing all the tales agreed. The Duke of Windermere gave freely and gave nothing. His money went out into the world by the river, to hospitals and schools and broken men, more of it than any 10 proud lords would part with. But himself he never gave. His presence could not be got for any occasion. His word could not be got for any price. He would send a fortune to a drowning family, and would not send the smallest promise of his own to a friend, for a promise is a thing of oneself, and himself was the one coin the Duke of Windermere had locked away and would not spend. Men called it coldness. Some few called it something sadder, and could not have said what. That such a man had turned his cold attention upon a widow selling a locket was a thing Alowan could not begin to make come right, and she said as much, plainly, for she had no strength left over for games. Why, she said, why should the Duke of Windermere trouble himself with me? He does not know me. No one who knows my name troubles with me, and the Duke of Windermere does not know it at all. The man Threlfall had no answer to give, or none he would give. He laid the proposal before her instead, in the smooth, exact voice, and it was a stranger thing by far than the name that carried it. His Grace, he said, was informed that the widow Culvain had lately parted with a family locket at Howcomb's rooms. His Grace wished to purchase that locket at a price Threlfall then named, and the price was so far beyond any sane reckoning of a thumb of worn gold that Alowan understood at once the locket was not truly the thing being bought. And there was more. His Grace was further informed that she was a lady of education, with a good eye and a careful hand, presently without a situation. At Windermere there was a great collection of pictures and miniatures and small precious things, gathered by 3 generations and set in no order, catalogued by no one. His Grace offered her the ordering of it. A true post, honestly paid at £40 the year, with her own rooms and the run of the library, and the freedom of a great house, for as long as the work should take. The carriage, said Threlfall, was at her disposal, and would carry her north whenever she was ready. He said it as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, and not a drowning woman's one lifeline thrown to her upon a rope whose far end she could not see. Every hard lesson of 2 hard years told her to refuse. A great man did not pay a fortune for a trinket and offer a ruined stranger a home in one breath without a reason, and a reason she could not see was a reason to fear. She asked him again, and less gently, why? And the man Threlfall, for the first time and the last, let something cross his smooth face that he had not been charged to show her. I have served his Grace 10 years, he said. I have never carried an errand of this kind for him before. I do not know why he sends it. I know only that when your name was set before him, madam, he was for a moment not a man, I recognized, and then he was himself again, and gave me my instructions in the voice he gives all his instructions. And I came. Make of it what you can. I can make nothing of it. It was not comfort. It was the truth, and Alowan had grown so unused to being told the truth by anyone that it did more with her than comfort would have done. She thought of the cold room and the empty grate which was the bottom, and she had reached it. She thought of the tall, dark man gone still by the window with his eyes upon her mother's gold. She thought, though she could not have said why, that whatever waited in the north, it was not the ordinary trap, for the ordinary trap did not go to such lengths, nor stare at a woman's hands as though they held a ghost. She said she would go. She could not in the end have told you whether it was courage or the want of any other road. The two feel very much alike at the bottom of a descent. Windermere, when she came to it 3 days later, was not the house she had braced herself against. She had braced herself, upon the long, cold road north, against something to match the man. A silent lord of a cold legend, she had reasoned, would keep a cold, silent house, all shut shutters, and covered furniture and long stone corridors going nowhere, in the dark. She had built a grim thing in her mind mile upon mile, the better to be ready for it, for she had learned that a braced heart bruises less. Windermere was not the grim thing at all. It stood in a fold of the northern hills, a long, low, rambling house of pale stone that had grown out of its ground across 400 years without any one plan. Gathering wings and gables and crooked chimneys as a family gathers habits, it should have looked bleak against the bare fells and the failing winter light. It did not. Every window along its front was lit warm gold from within, and smoke rose straight and untroubled from a dozen chimneys into the still cold air. It looked, she thought, climbing down stiff and frightened into the courtyard, exactly like a house that was lived in and loved, which was the last thing on earth she had expected of the Duke of Windermere. And it unsettled her more than any grimness could have done. Grimness she had been ready for. Grimness matched the tale. Warmth did not, and a thing that does not match its tale is a thing you cannot trust, for you cannot yet see where its edges lie. She was taken in by a housekeeper named Odell, a round, kind, capable woman who took Alohan's cold hands in both of hers as though they mattered, and clucked over the length of the road, and had her within the quarter hour into a small, warm, paneled room where a fire was already lit and burning, well, banked and tended as though it had been kindled an hour before her coming, and watched over ever since. "Was I looked for so exactly?" Alohan asked, for the readiness of the fire troubled her in a way she could not account for. "His Grace gave the order for it himself," said the housekeeper, and something moved across the round, kind face, some private wondering she did not choose to share. "He came down to this room this morning to see it made ready. He does not commonly trouble over the guest rooms. I could not tell you why he took the care. He is not a man who tells his people why he does a thing. But he took it." Then she straightened a curtain that did not need it, and went to the door. "You will want to sit close, and be warm," she said. "There is no ceremony kept at Windermere. There is no one here to keep it with, save her Grace, and her Grace keeps none that ever I saw." She went out, and Alohan stood before the good fire in the warm, strange room, and could not for a moment make it come right in her mind. In 2 years, no one had lit a fire for her before she asked for it. She had half forgotten there were houses where such a thing was simply done, and a Duke of Ice had come down himself to see this one drew clean, and she did not in the least know what she was to do with that. She met the Dowager Duchess that evening, and the Dowager Duchess at the least made a kind of sense. Her Grace was a small, upright woman of near 80, the Duke's grandmother, with a fine lined face and a pair of black eyes that had plainly missed nothing worth seeing in a long life. She made up in her own person for every word her grandson was said never to spend. She talked from the moment Alohan came into the warm, cluttered sitting room, a dry, quick, wandering commentary upon the road and the weather and the wickedness of the price of candles, and it was some little while before Alohan understood that the talk was a kindness, that the sharp old woman had seen her fright at a glance and was covering it, giving her time, asking nothing of her, but that she sit by the fire and let the words run over her until she stopped shaking inside. "You need not perform for me, child," said the Dowager, when Alohan had thanked her too many times and too carefully. "I have had 4 companions in as many years, and driven off every one, so you may spare your good manners against a colder day. You will want them here. I will tell you the part I can tell, which is my own, and the rest you must have from my grandson, if you were able to get it, which I doubt, for getting anything from Cassian is like getting water from a stone, and I have been at the stone 30 years. She named him so, without weight, the way the old name, a thing they have known too long to guard, and she went on to some further complaint about the candles, and did not see what she had done. But Alohan had gone still in her chair by the fire. Cassian. She had not heard the Duke of Windermere called by any name but his title in the whole strange passage since Threlfall had spoken it in the cold hall. She had not thought of him as a man with a given name at all, only as a cold, high legend that had, for reasons she could not fathom, reached down and gathered her up. And now the old woman had let the name fall by the fire, careless as a dropped stitch, and it had gone into a low one, like a key, into a lock she had not known was there, and something at the very back of the shut country of her memory turned over in the dark and began, slowly. She knew that name. Not the Duke's. The name of a young man, a long time ago in the Green County. In the last good spring before the world went cold, a young man of no fortune and no certain future, who had made her laugh under an apple tree and had made her a promise and had not kept it, and had let her go down into the dark without a word when a single word from him might have held her up. It could not be. She told herself it could not be. That young man had been a penniless younger son with no thought of any title, and this was the Duke of Windermere, the richest and coldest man in England. They could not be the one man. And yet the locket was in it, and the stillness by the window was in it, and now the name was in it. And Eloin sat very straight by the fire of the house that had taken her in and understood, with a slow, cold turning of the heart, that she had not been gathered up by a stranger at all. She had been brought, for a reason not one soul in that warm house had yet told her. To the door of the one man in all the world she had spent 10 years teaching herself to forget. Across the room the Dowager Duchess talked comfortably on about the candles, and did not know, or perhaps, being who she was, knew perfectly well, that she had just cracked open the whole of it with a single careless name. She saw him the next morning, and the not knowing ended, and a worse knowing took its place. She had risen before the house, being unable to sleep, and had gone down through cold corridors to the long gallery where the greater part of the collection hung, for she reasoned she might as well begin the work that was her reason for being there. The gallery ran the whole north length of the house, high and gray in the first light, hung frame upon frame, with 3 generations of faces and horses and ships and pale foreign hills. She had been in it a quarter hour, a branch of candles at her elbow, and a great ledger open upon a stand, when she felt the air of the room change, and turned, and he was standing in the doorway. She had not heard him come. She would learn that of him, that he moved as quietly as he withheld himself, that a man who has taught himself to give nothing learns first to make no sound. He was tall and dark, and there was gray now at his temples that had not been there in the Green County, and his face had set hard in the years between into a still closed thing that gave nothing away. But it was Cassian. She had known it from the name, and now she knew it from the face, and the knowing went through her like cold water, for the boy who had laughed under the apple tree was somewhere, in that hard face still buried, the way a summer is buried in the bones of a winter tree. His eyes found her. They were gray, a clear, cold storm gray, and they rested upon her with an attention so complete and so still that she felt it as a hand laid flat against her. She waited for him to speak her name. She waited for the past to come into the room and sit down between them. It did not. He inclined his head, precisely as a man greets a stranger who is in his employ. "You are before the servants," he said, and his voice was low and level, and gave away no more than his face. "You need not have troubled so early." Then he crossed the gallery to her, and took from his coat a small thing folded in clean white paper, and set it upon the ledger stand before her, and did not let his fingers come near hers in the setting down of it. She unfolded the paper. It was her mother's locket, the worn gold oval, the fair dead face within, come back to her, out of the fog of London, and the appetite of that cold city, as though the city had never had it at all. It should not have been let go, he said. It is yours. It was always yours. There is no price upon it, and there is none upon your place here. You owe this house nothing but the work you came to do, and you may leave the day the work grows heavy to you, and no one will hold you. She waited still for the catch. Everything in 2 hard years had taught her that a gift of this weight came with its price folded inside it like a knife in a loaf, and she stood with her mother's gold in her hands and waited to be told what the price would be. It did not come. He asked her for nothing. He did not ask her to be grateful. He did not ask her to remember him. He gave and closed his hand upon whatever it cost him, and that was all. For the smallest part of a moment, something moved far back in the gray eyes, some old drowned thing coming up toward the light. Then he shut upon it the way a man shuts a door upon a room he cannot afford to enter. "I am glad you are come," he said, which plainly cost him a good deal more than the locket had, and he inclined his head again and went out, and left her holding her mother in her 2 hands, with the whole of the unspoken past standing in the gray gallery like a fourth figure in the room. She knew him, he knew her. She was certain of both now, as certain as she had ever been of anything. And he had stood a yard from her with the past between them thick enough to cut, and had named none of it. He had given her back the last thing she owned, and had taken care not to let his hand touch hers. A cruel man, she could have understood. A cruel man had a shape. This she could not read at all, and the not reading of it frightened her more than any cruelty, for a price she could have paid, and a kindness with no price and no name she did not know how to hold. Let us pause here a moment. If you would not miss the rest of Olafen's story, take the small trouble to subscribe to the channel, and we shall go on. She stayed, because there was nowhere in the world for her to go that was better than a warm room and honest work, and because the locket lay again in the drawer of her dressing table, and because she found against every hard lesson she owned that she wished to understand him. And in the understanding of a man, there is no better teacher than a house. For a house keeps the truth of its master in 100 small places he never thinks to guard. She learned first that he was not idle, which surprised her, for she had built her cold legend out of a man who did nothing but brood. Cassian of Winmere worked, quietly and without cease, at the running of a great estate and a great deal beyond it. Letters went out from the house by the dozen, and money went with the letters, and Aloin, who had the run of the place, and an eye trained to the worth of things, began to see in glimpses where the money went. She saw the first of it on a raw morning in her 2nd week. There was a commotion in the stable court. A boy of perhaps 12 held hard by the collar between 2 keepers, white and shaking, and a brace of snared hares upon the cobbles beside him. The boy had been poaching the estate, which everyone knew, and the head keeper was working himself toward the magistrate and the law, which for a starving boy meant the end of everything, and the Duke was there. He had come out at the noise and stood a moment looking at the boy, at the thin wrists and the sharp, frightened face, and he did not speak a word of anger. He looked at the hares. He asked the boy very low, how many were at home to feed? And the boy told him, and the Duke was quiet. Then he told the head keeper that the boy was to be given work in the yard and a meal at the kitchen door each morning, and that if the boy poached again it would be because the keeper had failed to teach him better, and it would be the keeper who answered for it. He did not comfort the boy. He gave no soft word. He gave the thing the boy needed and turned and went in and left the whole yard staring, and the boy fed, and no one thanked to his face. She came upon it again and again once she had learned to see it. A tenant's rent quietly forgiven through a lawyer so that it seemed to come from a fund and never from a man. Prawn. A drowned carter's family kept off the parish by a pension arranged to look like the carter's own savings, so that the widow need never carry the weight of a great man's charity. A clever, poor child of the village sent to a good school by a hand it would never know to thank. She met one of them herself, an old weaver in the village who spoke to her of it, not knowing who she was, the way country people speak of a wonder. He had been failing and behind and waiting to be turned out, he said, and instead a paper had come forgiving him his arrears, and never a name upon it. Some fund, he said, and shook his head. They tell me a fund, but no fund walks the lane at first light to look at a poor man's roof and be gone before he can pull his boots on. There is a man hereabouts does more good than any 10 that preach it, and has took some hurt that keeps him from letting it be seen. I say my thanks to no name at all. I reckon the one I mean will know it." Eloan carried that home in her, and it did not leave her. She had come to Winmere believing herself the only soul the Duke had gathered up out of the cold. She saw now that she was one of a great quiet company, scattered through the fells and the cottages and the lanes, a whole nation of people, saved by a hand not one of them could name, who put a nameless man in their prayers and did not know he had a name to give at all. She asked the dowager of it once when the two of them sat over the fire. The old woman was quiet a while. "He does not care to be thanked," she said at last, "and I would have you understand it is not modesty, for you will be tempted to think it so, and it is not. It is a harder thing than that. He does not believe that anything of himself is worth the having, not his thanks, not his word, not his presence, nothing that is only him. So he gives the things that are real instead. Money is real. A roof is real. A place at a school is real. A man may give those and keep himself locked away behind them where he cannot fail anybody." The black eyes came up and rested on Eloan, bright and old and terrible in their gentleness. "He was not always so," she said. "Once he gave himself freely to a person, gave his whole heart and his whole word, and there came an hour when it was asked of him to stand and be counted for it, and he did not stand. He held his tongue when a word from him would have been everything. And the failing of that hour broke something in him that has never since mended, and he has spent 10 years giving the world everything he owns, except the one thing he failed to give that day, which was himself. I will not tell you the whole of it. It is his, and it is not a pretty story, and you are nearer the heart of it than you know. But that is the shape of the man you are cataloguing, child. He is not cold. He is a warm thing that has walled itself in stone against ever being warm at the wrong hour." Again, Eloan sat very still. She was nearer the heart of it than she knew the old woman had said, and Eloan thought she knew exactly how near, for she had once been a girl in a green county who had waited through a whole terrible spring for a young man to stand and be counted, and had waited, and he had not come. She had thought all these years that he had chosen his rank and his family over her, that he was a coward and a small, cold climber, and no more. She saw now that, whatever he had been, he had not walked away whole. He had walked away carrying the same wound he had dealt her, and had bled from it quietly for 10 years, in the only way a man may bleed who will not let it be seen. They came to know each other after that, in the way of two people shut up together in a great house through a long northern winter, which is to say, slowly and sideways and almost without words, for words were the one currency the Duke of Winmere would not spend, and Eloan had grown wary of spending herself. It was the collection that did it. He came to the gallery at the grey first hour drawn there. She understood at last by the knowledge that she would be in it, and he would settle a little way off with some paper of his own, and she would work, and after a while she would say a thing about a picture, some judgment of hers on a dead painter's cleverness or a dead sitter's vanity, and he would answer. He did not answer as other men answer, with easy talk poured out to fill a silence. He weighed each thing before he said it, as a man weighs a coin he is loath to part with, and so each thing he said was true, and considered, and meant. It was, she came to think, the truest talk of her life, carried on at the pace of a man who set each word down as though it were the last he had. She had been unkind, half to herself, about a smooth, flattering portrait of a long dead duchess, got up as a shepherdess. The painter, she said, had plainly been paid by the yard of silk, and not by the truth of the face. He was silent a moment, looking at it. "She kept sheep the way I keep bees," he said, from a great distance, and by paying another man to be stung. It was so dry and so unlooked for that she laughed aloud, the first time she had laughed in that house, and the sound of it seemed to reach him oddly, for he looked at her when she laughed the way a cold man looks at a fire he has told himself he does not want. Then he looked back at the shepherdess, and something in the set of his shoulders had eased, as though the laugh had loosed a knot in him. He had carried so long he had forgotten it was tied. After that a kind of rhythm grew between them at the gray hour, and by the objects he began, without ever seeming to give her small, true pieces of himself. He would take down a thing and set it in her hands and tell her its history, and in the history there was, if she listened, a little of his own. She came one morning upon a plain iron box set among the silver and the enamel, a mean, battered thing worth nothing, catalogued nowhere, and asked him why it kept such costly company. He was a long moment in the answering. It held my brother's letters. He said, who is dead these 10 years, and whose dying made me what I am, for I was a younger son with no thought of the title until the fever took him and left it to me. There is no price upon the box. That is the whole of why I keep it among the price things, to remind me what they are worth, set beside it, which is not much. It was the nearest thing to a confidence he had ever given her, and he seemed to feel it so, for he looked at her a moment longer than his habit allowed, as though weighing whether he might set one more true thing in her hands, and then thought the better of it, and did not. There was a miniature came up out of a drawer in the course of her work that stopped her hand. Vor. It was a young man of perhaps 22, dark, laughing, painted with the careless brightness of a face that has not yet been taught to guard itself, and she knew it before she read the small hand upon the back, for she had known that face once under an apple tree in a green county in the last good spring of the world. She sat with it a long time. The spring came up around her as she sat, whole, the way a scent will bring a whole year back. She had been 19. He had been the second son of a family that lodged the summer near her father's house, a young man with no fortune and no prospects, and a way of listening as though what she said were the only thing worth the hearing. He had made her a promise under that tree, that he would speak to his people, that he would come back before the leaves turned, that whatever it cost, he would have her and no other. And then her father's name had fallen into the fire that ruined it, and the whole green county had turned its face away, and she had waited through the turning leaves for the young man who had promised, and he had never come, and he had never written, and he had let her go down into the dark without one word. She had married Colvin out of that dark. She had taught herself, one hard year at a time, to unremember the apple tree. And here was the face of it in her two hands, in his own house. And here, coming quiet through the door at the gray hour, was the man it had grown into. He saw what she held. She watched him see it. For a moment, the hard-mastered face was not mastered at all, and she saw the whole of it cross him, the boy and the promise, and the failing and the 10 years, and she thought, now, he will speak of it now, the wall is down. His hand half rose. And then the old habit closed over him, like water over a stone, and he said only, in a voice gone rough, that the light in the gallery was poor so early and she must not tire her eyes. And he turned and went out, and left the truth lying between them unspoken, upon the ledger stand. But it had been there, they had both seen it be there, and a thing that has once been seen cannot be made unseen, however long two proud people decline to name it. She stood in the gray gallery, with the little laughing face in her hand, and understood that she could not go on much longer in the not naming. She had begun to want the truth from him, the way a starving woman wants bread, not the polite truth of the ledgers and the wages, but the whole cruel private truth of that vanished spring. Why he had not come, what had truly kept him, what the 10 silent years had been the paying for. And if he would not give it to her, and she was near sure now he never would, for he would sooner give her the whole world than the one true account of himself, then she would have it from the only other soul in that house who held it. She would have it from the old woman by the fire. She resolved that night that she would ask, and would not be turned, and she did not yet know that the asking would break the whole quiet winter open, and let in everything that was waiting beyond it. She went to the dowager the following evening, When the house was abed and the two of them sat alone over the last of the fire, and she did not lead up to it gently, for she had done with gentleness. "I have been at Windermere long enough now," she said, "and I mean to have the truth of your grandson, all of it, and I will not be turned from it with talk of candles." Alowan paused. "And I think you know why I have the right to ask." The old woman set down her needlework and looked at her a long, steady moment with the bright black eyes. "I wondered when you would say it," she said at last. "I have known who you were since the second night you sat at this fire. Cardew is not a name a person forgets who lived through the season it was ruined. And you have your father's stillness upon your face, and you flinched at his name once when I let it fall, and did not know you flinched." She folded her hands. "You are the girl. You are the girl he loved and lost, and has never once in 10 years let himself speak of. And I am going to break my word to him and tell you the whole of it, for you have earned it in blood, and I am too old to carry another person's secret to the grave when the keeping of it is doing this much harm. Sit." It is not a short story, and it is not a kind one. She told it. She told it in her dry old voice with the fire sinking, and Alowan sat still as stone and let it take the last of the ground from under her. "There had been a summer," said the dowager, 10 years gone, when Cassian was a younger son of 21, with no fortune of his own and no thought of the title, for his brother stood between him and it. That summer he lodged near a green county and lost his whole heart to a gentleman's daughter, and wrote to me of her as I had never had him write of anything, and swore he would marry her though the heavens fell. And then the heavens fell, both halves of them, in a single autumn. His brother took a fever in the October and was dead in a fortnight, and Cassian, who had wanted nothing but a country girl and a quiet life, woke one grey morning the heir to a dukedom, and the whole weight of this house. That was the first blow. The second came in the same season and was worse. Your father was destroyed. Alowan did not move. You were told he took money that was not his, said the dowager. From a trust he kept, he did not take it. A great man took it, rich and smiling, and respected the length of England, who sat on the same charity as your father, and helped himself to its funds for years. Your father found him out, and took his findings to the light, as an honest man will who has not yet learned what the world does to such men. And the great man who had a forger in his pay and a lawyer in his pocket and the ear of everyone who mattered, turned the whole thing inside out in a week. He made it your father's hand upon the theft, the villain of his own discovery. His name was, and is, Sir Ashton Crail. The name meant nothing to Alowan then. It would come to mean a great deal. Now hear the cruelty of it, said the dowager, for here is where my grandson enters, and here is where he broke. Cassian knew. He was near enough that season to know the truth of it, that your father was innocent and Crail was guilty, and being 21 and in love and still believing that truth had only to be spoken to be heard, he meant to stand up and say it. He meant to save your father and to keep his promise to you in the one act. And then Crail came to him. She stopped, and her old hands were not quite steady. You must understand what Crail had. My son, Cassian's father, the old duke, was a weak and a foolish man with a great love of the card table, and he had, across his foolish life, put this whole house so deep into Sir Ashton Crail's debt that Crail held the roof over our heads in his fist. Mortgages. Notes, a secret or two of the kind that ruins. He held all of it, and when Cassian became the heir, Crail came to that grieving boy of 21 and laid it out plain. Speak for Cardew, he said, and I will call in every note the same day and turn your dying father and your mother and your grandmother into the road, and your word alone, with no proof, will not save Cardew in any case, for who will believe a green boy against me? Stay silent, and the house stands. Choose. Alowan heard her own voice come out of her, very low, and he chose the house. He chose the house, said the dowager. He was 21. His brother was 3 weeks in the ground, his father dying, his mother breaking, and his grandmother, who is myself, frightened for the first time in her life. And he had no proof, and was told, truly enough, that his speaking would save no one and destroy us all. So he held his tongue. He let your father fall. He did not come to you, for he could not come without telling you why. And to tell you why was to put a weapon in your hands that Crail would have made you pay for. So he gave you nothing, not a word, not a line. He let you think him the worst kind of coward because the truth was a thing he could not afford to hand you. It was the one great failure of his life, and it broke the open-hearted boy clean in half, and the man you catalog for is what grew back over the break. A man who trusts nothing of himself, who gives the world everything he owns and never once his own word or his own heart, because the one time it mattered most, his word was worth nothing, and his heart cost other people everything. The fire had sunk to red. Eloan sat in the near dark and understood, at last and completely, the whole terrible architecture of him. He has spent the 10 years since undoing it, said the dowager, in the only way he trusts, in deeds and never in words. He has paid off every farthing Crail held over this house, so that Crail holds nothing of us now. He has gathered, quietly, year upon year, what proof he could find of what Crail did to your father, waiting for the day he might have enough to be believed, for he swore he would never again speak a truth he could not prove. He could not give your father his name back while he lived, and your father is dead, but he watched all these years for what would become of the daughter. And when word reached him this winter that a widow named Colvane, who had been a Cardew, was refused at every door in London and selling her mother's locket to keep from the street, he did the first thing a silent man can do. He opened his own door to you. The old woman's voice was gentle and pitiless at once. There. Now you know why the fire was lit before you, asked. It was never for a companion child. It was for a debt 10 years old that he has never forgiven himself and cannot pay, because the only coin that would pay it is the one coin he has taught himself he must never spend. Eloan sat a long time in the cold, bright morning that followed, in the small, warm room with the good fire, and turned it all over, and it cut her every way she turned it. There was the pity of it, which was very great, for she had loved that boy under the apple tree, and she saw now what had been done to him. In the same season it was done to her, saw the two of them broken by the one man in the one autumn, and set to bleed apart for 10 years, each believing the worst that could be believed. That was the part that wanted to soften her wholly, and she would not let it. Not yet, for under the pity was a harder thing, and she made herself look at the harder thing. He had known. That was the stone she could not swallow. Every day of 10 years, he had known her father was innocent, had known she was somewhere carrying the poisoned name of a thief's daughter, refused at doors, ground down, believing herself the child of a man who had stolen from orphans, and he had said nothing. His reasons were real, and they did not give her back 1 hour of the 10 years she had spent, ashamed of a man who had done no wrong. He had gathered his proof in silence and let her suffer in ignorance, rather than give her even the private gift of the truth that her father had been good. He might have sent her 1 line. He sent her nothing until he could send a whole rescue with no word attached to it, and even that from behind his wall, and even now, knowing she knew, he said nothing and left an old woman to break the news he had not the courage to carry himself. She thought, for the better part of that day, that the thing to do, the only thing a proud woman could do, was to take what he had given her, her mother's locket and the wages honestly earned, and go. To go into some town where no one knew either name and make a small life and stop being the object of a great man's guilt. For that was all she was to him, she told herself, the debt with a face, the account he could not close. He did not want her. He wanted to be forgiven, and she was not willing to spend the rest of her life being a man's absolution. She had her hand near the decision, the way she had once had her hand near Pruitt's pen when the other thing turned it. For she had not spent a winter in that house cataloging pictures. She had spent it coming to know a man, And the man she had come to know was not the debt and was not the guilt. He was the one who had fed a poaching boy without a soft word, and walked a poor man's fields before light, and kept his dead brother's letters in an iron box among the silver to remind himself what things were worth. He was the warm thing walled in stone, and she saw sitting there that she was perhaps the only soul alive who had ever been given the chance to reach through the stone, for she was the wound itself, the very person whose loss had built the wall, and if anyone living could unbuild it, it was she, and only she. She had come to Windermere to be saved. She saw now, with a slow turning of the heart, that she had it backward, that she had been brought there, though not one soul had planned it so, to do the saving. And to a woman who had lost everything and learned to smile over the losing, that was worth more than any wage or any warm room in England, to be needed for the one thing no one else on the earth could give. She had thought that gone with her father and her name and her girlhood, she found it was not gone. And so she did not go. She stayed, and she stopped waiting for him to speak first, for she saw that a man who has taught himself across 10 years that his word is worthless will never be argued out of it by another person's words. He would have to be shown. So she began, quietly, and without once naming to herself or to him what she was about, to lay her long, slow siege to the stone. She did not press him to speak of the past. She let it lie where it lay, and she stayed near it, and she gave him instead, morning upon morning at the gray hour, the one thing no one had given him in 10 years, which was her plain company, with no account kept and no thanks owing and no wall of her own thrown up to answer his. She talked, and did not mind, that he mostly did not. She let him grow used, by inches, to a warmth that asked him for nothing, and would not go away however coldly he met it. It was the slowest work she had ever set her hand to, and she found, to her own surprise, that she did not resent one day of it, for it was the first work in 2 long years that was building a thing up, instead of selling a thing off. The thing that changed the temper between them came, as such things come, out of a night that had nothing to do with either of them, and it was worse than a sick room, and quicker. There was a hard black frost in the 3rd week of February, and then a wind, and somewhere past midnight a cottage, at the edge of the home farm, took fire. A poor thatched place, with a whole family sleeping in it. The bell went, and the house woke, and the yard filled with running men and the red light climbing the sky, and Alowan, who could no more have stayed abed than flown, wrapped herself in a cloak, and went down into the cold and the noise to do what a pair of hands could do. The Duke was already there. She saw him in the red light, coat gone, sleeves back, working the line of buckets with the lowest of his men. No more the cold high legend now than the stable boy beside him, only another pair of arms against the fire. They got the mother out, and the old grandfather, and 3 of the children, and then someone screamed that the least one was not among them, the boy of 4, still inside, and the roof was going. He did not stop to weigh it. That was the thing she carried away from that night. The man who weighed every word before he spent it did not weigh this for the half of a second. He put his arm across his face and went into the smoke, into the falling house, while the whole yard cried out against it. And Alowan, who had smiled through the loss of everything she owned, and had believed there was nothing left in the world with the power to frighten her, stood in the red light with her heart stopped in her chest and learned that she had been wrong, for the length of that waiting was the longest stretch of her life. She began to count the seconds, as she had once counted small coins, and lost the count. She watched the ridge of the roof begin to sag. She heard a beam go somewhere deep inside with a sound like a great tree coming down, and a woman near her began to keen, and still he did not come. And Alowan understood in that stretched and dreadful minute exactly how much she stood to lose in the burning of that cottage, and it was a very great deal more than she had let herself know. And then he came out bent double with the child inside his coat, and the roof came down behind him in a great gout of sparks. A breath after his heel had cleared the door, he gave the boy to its mother. He stood in the ruin of the light, black with smoke, his hands scored, breathing like a man who has been under water, and he turned, and across the trampled mud and the dying fire his eyes found Eloan, and hers found his. And there was no ledger between them now, and no picture to talk sideways about, and no wall left standing that a night like that would let stand. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and all of it was in the look, the boy under the tree, and the 10 years, and the wound, and the winter, and the thing that had grown up in the winter that neither of them had dared to name, and neither of them looked away. It lasted a moment. It lasted an hour. She could not have said. Then the child set up a wail, which is the surest sign a child will live, and the mother sobbed, and the ordinary world came back into the yard and folded the moment away into itself. But it had happened. They had both been there, black with the same smoke, when it happened, and a thing that has happened cannot afterward be made. Not to have happened, however long, two proud and frightened people go on saying nothing of it in the gray light of the mornings after. The trouble came, as it always comes, from the one with most to lose by the truth, and it came pleasantly, and it came without a mark left in the way of such men. Sir Ashton Crail had prospered in the 10 years since he destroyed an honest man. He was old now, and richer than ever, and respected past the reach of any ordinary reproach, a great name in charity, a giver of hospitals. He had built his whole long, comfortable age upon the grave of the thing he had buried, and like all such men he slept badly, for a buried thing is a thing that may always come up. And that winter, word reached him that it might. He heard that the Cardew daughter, whom he had thought safely lost in the poverty he had made for her, was living under the roof and the protection of the Duke of Windermere, and that she had come there by way of a locket, an old gold locket of her mother's, that the Duke had bought for a strange great sum and carried north. The two pieces of news together frightened Sir Ashton Crail as he had not been frightened in 10 years, for Windermere was the one man who had ever known the truth and been made to swallow it. And Crail held nothing over that house any longer, and did not know what the Duke had gathered in the silence of a decade. And the locket frightened him more. He had torn Cardew's house apart 10 years before, hunting one paper he had never found, and had told himself in the end it was burned. Now here were Cardew's daughter and Cardew's locket both come up out of the dark at once, under the wing of his one enemy, and the old fear woke in him and went to work. He moved as he had always moved, against the daughter, and against her name, and pleasantly. It was the oldest weapon there is, and the surest, and it cost him nothing. A young widow, unmarried, living in the country house of an unmarried duke, was a thing that needed only to be named in the right voice, in the right rooms for the naming, to do all the rest. It did not matter that his own grandmother kept the house. It did not matter that every propriety was kept. Crail let fall, here and there, in a dozen good drawing rooms, with a great show of reluctance and a sorrowful shake of the head, that it was a sad thing, was it not? A very sad thing, that the daughter of poor ruined Cardew, whatever one thought of the father, should have thrown away the last rag of her good name to go and live so very irregularly with a man like Windermere. And he let the sorrowful little silence after it do the work. Within the month it was everywhere. The county that had begun to receive the dowager's new companion closed its faces again, one after another, exactly as the world had closed on Eloan before. She learned it the way one learned such things, a coldness here, a letter unanswered there, and then all at once and cruelly, when she went with the dowager to a house where the old woman had been received for 50 years, and the daughter of that house came out to the carriage herself, pink and wretched, to say that her mother was not at home. The dowager duchess, near 80, who had not been refused a door in the whole of her life, sat very straight in the carriage and said nothing until they were away, and then she said, in a voice shaking with a rage Eloan had never heard from her, "So it is Crail's work again, and they will shut their doors on me, at my age, sooner than on him." And under the rage, Heirloom heard the hurt, and knew herself the cause of it. There came to her also, that same season, a quieter reproach, and it frightened her the more once she had understood it. A smooth letter arrived from a man of business she did not know, offering, on behalf of a nameless client, a sum of money so large that she read the figure through twice in exchange for two small things. She was to take herself quietly out of the north and begin a fresh life in whatever distant town she chose. And she was to part with an old gold locket of her mother's, of no value to any soul but herself, which the client had a sentimental wish to own. It was dressed as a kindness, a door out of all her troubles held wide by a generous stranger. But Heirloom had learned in a hard school to read the true shape of an offer under its wrapping, and she understood at once that no man alive pays a fortune for a trinket he calls worthless, and that the very hand shutting the doors of the county against her was now reaching, gently, for the one thing of her mother she had never understood the worth of. She did not answer the letter, and she began for the first time to wonder what a great and frightened man could possibly want with the little worn locket in her palm. There was worse, and it came the same week, and it told them at last what the locket was. A man was taken at night in the gallery, a hired man, no thief of ordinary things, for he had passed a case of gold snuff-boxes to reach the drawer where the catalogue jewels lay. And it was Heirloom's mother's locket, and that alone he had his hand upon when the household took him. He would not say who had sent him. He did not need to. And Heirloom, holding the recovered locket that night with the Duke standing grim beside her, understood at last that the thing had a worth beyond its gold, a worth that had sent a thief the length of England for it, and she turned it over in her two hands, this last small thing of her mother's that she had carried and slept beside and nearly sold, beneath the little painted face where the gold backing did not sit quite true, the faint edge of something folded and hidden and waiting 10 years to be found. They opened it together at the gray hour in the gallery, and what her father had hidden in it came out into the light at last. It was a single folded paper, worn soft as cloth, in her father's hand, the honest, exact hand she had not seen in 10 years, and it was all the proof there was. The account in Creel's own figures, copied out and sworn by a dying man who had known he was to be destroyed and had hidden the one thing that could undo his destroyer in the one place his enemy would never think to tear apart, a woman's locket, a trinket, a thing priced so small that the man who priced everything had overlooked it. He had pressed it upon her mother in his last free week. Heirloom understood now, weeping at last, the tears she had trained herself out of for 2 long years, and had told her only to keep it close, and never why, so that the child might carry the proof of his innocence through the world. Her father had not died having given up. He had died having planted a seed in the one soil he trusted, betting across the whole length of his ruin on a justice he would never see. Heirloom went to the Duke that evening to tell him she must go. She had never once gone to him in the whole winter to speak of anything that mattered, and she went now because the slander was ruining the 2 people who had been kind to her, and the only decent thing left in her power was to take herself and the talk away together. She found him in his study, the candles lit, the exact hand moving over a paper, and he looked up when she came in, and something crossed the still face at the sight of her, quickly mastered. "You must let me go," she said, and she said all of it plainly, because he was a man who trusted only real things, and a plain truth plainly said was the realest thing she had to give him. "You know what is being said, and who is saying it, and why. Your grandmother was refused a door at her age because of me. That man means to ruin all 3 of us to keep his grave shut, and he can do it, because a lie in the right mouth cannot be answered. I know the whole of it now. I know what was done to my father, and what was done to you, and what it cost you to hold your tongue, and I do not hold it against you any longer, for you were a boy, and he was a monster, and you have paid—" Her voice caught, and she steadied it. "You owe my father nothing further. You owe me nothing at all. Let me go, and let the talk go out of the house with me, and keep your grandmother her doors and yourself your peace. It is the last thing I can do for any of you, and I am asking you to let me do it." There was a long silence. It was not like the other silences. She watched him take up his pen, out of 10 years of habit to set his answer down in ink where it was safe. And she watched him look at the pen and look at her and lay the pen down. He came round the desk. He stood before her, close, and she had to lift her face to his, and she saw in the gray eyes the whole of the wound the old woman had named, and something else now, something that had grown all winter and had nothing to do with any debt to any dead man. And the Duke of Windermere, who had not given a word of himself to a living soul in 10 years, gave one. "No," he said. It was one word, low and rough, with all the long disuse of the true things in him, and it plainly cost him more than running into a burning house had cost him. "No, you will not go." He drew a breath like a man stepping off a height. "It was a debt once. It stopped being a debt the second morning you told me a dead painter was a liar and did not care that I was a duke, and I have known every day since and said nothing, because I stopped believing, long ago, that any word of mine was worth the risk of saying. I was wrong. You have taught me there is a thing worse than speaking a truth and having it do harm. It is holding a truth that would do good, and calling your silence wisdom and letting the harm be done. I called my silence wisdom for 10 years. It was fear." He looked at her, and the ghost of the boy came up whole into the hard face for the first time. "I will not let Crail ruin you. I have the proof, now, mine and your father's together, and I will not use it in silence through a lawyer as I have used everything. I will stand up before the people who matter and say it aloud, which is the one thing I swore I would never do again, and I will do it because it is you, and I find I can bear to do it only for you." The great meeting of the county charities was held that spring in the assembly rooms of the county town, and Sir Ashton Crail came to it as every year, the greatest giver in the room, to be thanked and toasted, certain at the height of his power that the doors were shut on the Cardew girl for good, and the grave was safe. He had built his whole plan as 10 years before, upon the silence of the Duke of Windermere, which was the surest thing in England. Alowan came too, on the dowager's arm, into the long, bright rooms, full of the people who had refused her, and held her back straight, and was cut by 100 faces at once, and bore it, for she had borne it before. And then the Duke of Windermere, who never came, who never spoke, who never gave the world one word of himself, rose from the edge of the room where he had always stood, and crossed it, and took his place beside her where all could see, and turned to face them, and spoke. "You have made a great deal, over the years, of my silence," he said, and his voice, rough at the first and then steadying, carried down the long room into a stillness that fell like a dropped cloth. "You have called it pride and coldness and worse. I will tell you now what it was. 10 years ago an honest man named Cardew was destroyed for a crime he did not commit, and I knew who did commit it, and I was made to hold my tongue, and I have held it since. He did not take the money from the Marsh Street Orphans Fund. He found the man who did, and that man, to bury it, made it seem the honest man's hand, and ruined him, and let him die of the shame of it." He looked once at Crail, and then out at the room, and drew from his coat the papers, his own and the worn soft one from the locket, and held them up. "The man who robbed those orphans and destroyed John Cardew to hide it is in this room and has been thanked tonight for his charity. His name is Sir Ashton Crail. I have the proof of it here, in his own figures, and in the dead man's hand, and I will keep my silence no longer, whatever it costs me and whatever it costs him. Cardew is innocent. His daughter is innocent. And the next soul here who offers her an unkindness will answer for it to me, for I find after 10 years that I have got my voice back at last, and a great deal that I mean to say with it. The silence that fell then was the worst kind there is, the kind that turns slowly all in one direction, and it turned towards Sir Ashton Crail, standing alone in the bright room with his charity turning to ash upon him, and no gracious sigh left that could cover what a duke had laid open before everyone who mattered. He had built a long life on a dead man's name and a buried paper. And the paper was in a duke's hand now, and there was nothing to say. He gathered what was left of him, which was not much, and went out through the parting crowd alone, and the doors of that county closed behind him, one by one, in the weeks that followed, exactly as they had once closed on a girl who had done nothing at all. They cleared her father's name that spring, in the proper forms, in a quiet room, and not a loud one, for the loud part was done. It took lawyers and the weight of a duke, and the worn, soft paper from the locket laid upon a magistrate's table. At the end there was a document that said, in the dry language of such things, that John Cardew stood acquitted of any wrong, and his good name restored to him and to his heirs. Lowen held it in the gallery at the grey hour with the Duke beside her, and she wept. The whole of the weeping she had smiled instead of doing for 2 hard years. He did not, this once, hide behind a gift. He put his arm about her and let her weep, because, for once, nothing needed saying, and it was the fullest silence of that whole silent winter. He did not live to see it, she said, when she could speak. That is the thing that will not mend. You have given him back his name, and he is not here to have it. He died believing he had failed, that his honest, careful life had come to nothing, that his daughter was left with a poisoned name and no one in the world. He did not die having given up, said the Duke. He knew he was innocent, and trusted the truth would keep, and hid it in the one thing he knew you would keep beside you always. You cleared him tonight as much as I did. You carried the proof of him against your own heart for 10 years, and never knew it. That is not the act of a man who gave up. It is the act of a man who believed, against everything, in a morning he would not live to see. She was quiet a long while. Then she said, You have given me back my father's name, and my own, and a fortune I did not ask for, and a place in a world I am not sure I want back. You have given me everything you own, as you give everyone. When will you give me the one thing you have never given anyone? And the Duke of Windermere, who had freed her first, deliberately, before he let himself ask, so that she should choose, out of no need and no gratitude, for she had the whole world back, and owed him nothing, gave it. He did not write it on a paper. He said it aloud, still a little rough, for the voice would always carry the mark of the years it had gone unused. I have been alone inside my own silence for 10 years, he said, and did not know it was loneliness, until you filled it. I gave the world everything I had, rather than risk the one thing that was only mine, because the one time I spent it, it cost the people I loved everything. You have taught me it costs more to keep it. Stay. Not as my grandmother's companion, not as a debt, for the debt is paid, and not because you must. Stay because you would. Marry me, Elowen, and teach me how to spend myself, for I can bear to learn it only from you, and I have 10 years of it saved up. And Elowen Cardew, who had come north with all she owned in one small case and no future at all, stood in the gallery where a silent man had first put her mother back into her hands and made the choice that was wholly her own now. Freely, choosing only because she chose. I have loved 2 men, she said, and they turned out to be one, which is more luck than a woman has any right to. I will marry you, and I warn you, Cassian, I have grown fond of your silences too, and mean to keep some of them. She reached up and touched the hard face, the first time she had ever touched him. But you gave me a better thing. Before ever you gave me the name. You gave it that first morning when you put my mother back into my hands and asked me for nothing, not even to remember you. You gave me back the belief that a kindness could be only a kindness with no price folded inside it. In a city that put a price upon everything, that was the worst thing I lost, worse than the name. That is the man I am marrying. Not only the Duke who broke his silence before the county, though I love him too. The one who gave without a price. They were married at Windermere in the early summer, quietly, for neither cared for grandeur, and the Dowager Duchess sat in the front pew looking as though she had arranged the whole of it, which she maintained to the considerable end of her days she substantially had. And there is a habit they kept in the long, good years after. Every morning at the grey early hour the Duke and Duchess of Windermere went together to the long gallery and sat a while among the pictures in the silver, the whole priced weight of 3 grand generations. And on the wall among all of it, given the place of honor the greatest painting had used to hold, hung a small worn oval of gold on a thin chain, valued once at almost nothing, the last heirloom of a ruined house that had carried an innocent man's truth 10 years through the dark and had bought back everything. No one who did not know the story could say why a duchess should honor so plain a scrap of gold above the masters, but Heirloom knew why. In a city that put a price upon everything, one man had given her a thing that had no price at all, and asked her for nothing in return. It was the whole of her happiness in the end, and it had begun without a single word,